Good afternoon, everybody. Some basic Excel formulas to give you some ideas of how you can use them in different use cases. My name is Brent Myron. I'm in the IT department here at Community CPA, and my kind of specialty is data-related things. So Excel is one of those tools that I use a lot. I'm very familiar with. So I'm hoping to give you some good tips and tricks and using it and some various things I can do this afternoon. Here you have our website and our phone number if you want to contact us. That's my info. Before we get started, just a little disclaimer. So take everything here with a grain of salt, and do your own research and work with different experts. Don't take any of this as sort of legal advice or anything of that sort. And we're just not responsible for any damages that could arise from misuse of this information or whatnot. Okay, so why talk about Excel? Well, Excel is one of those things that is just ubiquitous, right? If you have Windows, it could, comes with Excel pre-installed. If you're using Word, your Word license comes with Excel, and Excel is good for a lot of different things. And so I like to say it's a jack of all trades program. You can do a little bit of everything, but it is also a program that is master of none. There, especially when it comes to like data-related things, personal experience. There are other solutions that, when you progress beyond a certain point, there are other better solutions, right? You want to put your data in a database and not have it in an Excel spreadsheet, or you want to be tracking things in some specialized software or whatnot. But it is so simple and easy to use, and everyone has access to it. That's always it's a good place to get started, and it can do a lot of different things. Like I'm going to give this presentation in Excel, so it's acting as a layout and a presentation mechanism here. So it's doing a little bit of PowerPoint, a little bit of Word, and that kind of thing. And it can always be good to kind of jump into Excel and maybe like prototype something or kind of figure something out. And at the very least, it can always be something that you can use to accomplish a task very quickly if you know how to do it. There are certain things where it doesn't make sense to use something else. You might as well just open Excel, do little things, get what you need to have done. So we have a little meme here. You couldn't solve your problem with other software, or that bring you back to Excel. It's something that you come back to, even though it's not exactly my preferred tool for certain things. It's just useful. It's just useful. And here we're just going to specifically talk about the title of the talk is getting started with formulas, and really we're going to talk about formulas, but also functions, which are built-in things that Excel can do. And so just a little bit of definition here. A formula is a calculation that Excel is doing. So in this example, 4 plus 5, and if we get rid of that little placeholder, calculates to 9, right? A function is a specialized piece of, I guess, like programming. It's a little bit of code that does something. It takes inputs and gives you an output. So this here is the sum function, and you're passing it 2 arguments, a 4 and a 5, and it's just going to sum them together. So if we do that, it's the same thing, 9. Both these are formulas, but this formula uses a function, the sum function. So once again, it takes inputs, it's taking 4 and 5, and it's outputting a sum of them, which is 9. It basically maps those inputs to some outputs, right? That's generally what a function's definition is. So to start off, let's talk about some of the really commonly useful functions that I think people want to know about. And one of them is VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, which is basically a way of joining 2 sets of data together, or looking up something from one set of data into another. So for example, let's just say we have some information about these people here in this table, right? We have names of people and their favorite color. And then let's say we're trying to send birthday cards out to these 4 individuals. We have their addresses in this one table, but we just want to be able to look up their favorite color from this other table, and then have this one table that contains all that information. And sometimes it can be really useful in terms of maybe we also want to know who in this table, or who's missing from one table versus the other, and we can use a lookup to kind of join them together and see what doesn't quite match up. But in this example, they perfectly match up. And there's two kind of, well, traditionally the VLOOKUP is the formula that Excel originally started using, and more recently they have created this XLOOKUP formula that has slightly different syntax. It's, you know, what you pass to that formula is slightly different in terms of inputs, but it generally operates a lot better. So, but we'll first start with VLOOKUP. So one of the key things is whenever you're in Excel and you start typing a formula, it's going to give you like auto completion suggestions here. So we get VLOOKUP and then we tab over and it completes it. And it's also showing me basically what are the arguments that you want to pass to this formula. So in the case of VLOOKUP, you're looking for, you're trying to have it look up a value. So here we want it to look up the value for John, and we want it to look up it in a certain table array. This table array is this one right here. So it's looking, we want it to look into this table for John, and then we want it to return a column index number. And in that case, we want it to be the second column, which is the column that contains colors. So we'll put a 2 there. And then finally, there's an option where it's asking you if you want to find an exact match, or maybe you want to find an approximate match. An approximate match might be useful in cases where you're looking for something like in between a couple of numbers, or, you know, it's hard for me to come up with a good example off the top of my head, but like you want to find the person, maybe your table, maybe your lookup table is sorted by ranking. You want to find the person, or maybe by like salary or something like that, and you want to find the person who has the first salary that's above 10,000. So you can use an approximate match so that maybe they don't find the person that has exactly 10,000, but it will return the person that has, you know, an approximate match of 10,000, either before or after. So, but here we want a exact match, and so there we go, red. It looked into this table, found John, and returned red. Now, what we can then do is I'm actually going to just change the references here. What I'm doing is basically fixing these references. When you copy a formula in Excel, it will like change the position of these references. So by putting these $ before these column and row numbers, those won't change if I copy the formula to another cell. So when I do copy it, it's going to change where it's looking in this first column. It's going to keep copy down, and it's going to keep looking at the same exact table. And there we go. So I have used VLOOKUP to look up from this person's table the favorite color. XLOOKUP is slightly different in its syntax, but is generally more useful because VLOOKUP, one of the limitations of VLOOKUP here is that it requires this table to be all together, and it also requires the thing that you're looking up to be to the right of what you're using to look up. So if, for example, if color was over here, VLOOKUP is looking for in the first column of this table for the lookup value, and then it's returning, you know, whatever column you specify to the right of it. But if these were flipped, VLOOKUP couldn't do that lookup, but XLOOKUP can because of its syntax. So let's take a look at that very briefly. So once again, XLOOKUP wants to look a value, and we'll give the name. And here it's asking for a lookup array and then a return array, which is basically just specifying, instead of the whole table, it's wanting you to directly specify the lookup array, which I'm going to look up in these names, and the return array right here. And as long as these are the same length, this will work. Then there's some additional optional options. These optional options, you can tell they're in brackets here, so they're not essential. So if not found, we can just return a blank value, which is just, this is an empty string, empty, nothing in between two quote marks. The type of match, we want an exact match. So it tells us we can do an exact match or next smaller item, etc. So what you can do, an exact match, we'll say 0 there. And then if you're looking up something that's very, very long, there's different search options. So you can either search through these arrays, first to last, last to first, or if they're sorted, you can use these different search methods. So I think one of the easiest ways to kind of think about it is like a dictionary, I guess, where if you're looking up a word in dictionary, you open up maybe like you open up to a certain part of the dictionary, and then you see if you're too far into the dictionary, you'll go a little bit forward, and if you're if you went too far forward, you're then look in between those two spots, and you're going to kind of narrow your search down. That's what binary search is. So we'll do an exact match, and we will search first to last. And then once again, it returns that red. Once again here, if I want to copy this formula, I want it to change the position of the lookup value, but I want it to keep these two arrays fixed. So I'm just going to add $signs to all that stuff to make them fixed references. And if I copy this again, there we go. We did a lookup with XLOOKUP. Once again, it's very, very useful, especially if you're just comparing two lists. Like maybe someone gives you a list of clients, and someone and then they ask you to compare it to a list of products to say, do we have a project made in our product management system for each one of these clients? You can use the lookup to kind of basically join those together, see which ones are missing, and then just kind of go from there. Next, we'll talk about some summary functions. So obviously we already talked about sum, where it's just going to add together the arguments that are passed in between them. Here, you can actually see that a range, or once again, like a range or an array, where it's from H4 to H8 here. So if we just remove this little tick place marker at the beginning of it, it'll actually evaluate. We get the sum of this range being 1600. Some ifs lets you add some like conditional logic on top of that. So here we're asking it to basically sum that same range, but only if the values are more than 300. Maybe we said, benchmark for sales for like high earners was maybe like a 300. So we want to figure out how many of our maybe top earners made, and those top earners are the only ones in above that threshold. So what we're doing here, let's remove this, and let's briefly look at it. So here we're looking at the range to sum. The criteria, we want it to be above 300, and the sum range. This is the range criteria. So we want this range, we look at this criteria, and then we sum that range if this range right here, if that is true. And so we see that we have two top earners, and their sums together are 1,000. Some ifs lets you take that a little bit further and have multiple conditions. Here in this example, you can look at the argument syntax, where we specify the sum range. So if our conditions are met, we're going to sum in this array here, and we're going to look into this range right here, and we're going to see if it's division 1. And if it's division 1, then it passes that condition, and then we'll consider the second condition where if it's in this range right here, which is the region range, if it's central, it will return the value. So we're expecting this to return division 1 central, so it should be 200. There we go. Count if is another very, very similar to it, where it's just going to return the number of rows. So here we have 5, right? It's telling me that I have 5 rows. If I erase one of these values, it will tell me 4. So it might tell me there's a missing value, especially if I'm looking at a long list. You can run a simple count on it to get an idea of like how many values are missing from that list in one column. And similarly, we can do a conditional count. We're looking again to whether we have a division and whether it's a central division. We get 1. Sum and count are so useful that they're built into Excel, where it's just going to do these things naturally. For example, so if I highlighted this range right here, you'll actually see at the bottom of the screen that's providing me the sum of that, the count of it, and the average. And same thing here, like it's not going to show me a sum because these obviously numeric, but it's going to show me the count of what I selected. So that's all. That's also a very useful thing. You can do different sorts of summary statistics if you have a piece of data that you're trying to understand a little bit. Some of these terms might be familiar to you, but you get the average of these numbers, the average sales. Median is the sales in the middle. Here's return 300. Most mode is the sort of most common or most oftenly occurring number. So we have two people who did two regions that did 500 sales. So that's what that returns. You can look for what the minimum in here, and it's gonna give us 100. You can look for the maximum. That'll give us 500. There's a quartile function which lets you find basically the different quartiles, which are equivalent to some of these, right? The maximum and the minimum value are equivalent to basically the 0 and the 100th quartile. The median value is the 50% quartile. But here we might want to find a different quartile and get an idea of a distribution of data in that way. And standard deviation is just a measure of your data spread, which is also useful in certain contexts. So there are built-in functions in Excel to do all these different things. Excel has a lot of different functions to help you manipulate text. So here in this example, there's a length function, len, and we're pointing it at the sentence. And the sentence is 41 characters long. So this length function should tell us how long that is. Here we have an example of a name, a first name, first initial, last name, and if we want to extract the first initial, we use the left function to tell us to look into this string M Smith and return the first character, the first initial. So if we let that evaluate, it should return M. Here, let's say it's a phone number, and we want to just find the last 4 digits of the phone number and use that for something. Or maybe you're looking for the first 3 digits if you want to look at the area code. But in this case, if you want to look and grab the 4 most right digits, we pass the string of the phone number, and we tell the right function to grab those 4 digits, and so it should return those 4 nines. There you go. Concat is a very useful function. Concat is short for concatenate, which is just a kind of fancy way of saying putting together two different strings, like pasting them together into one string. So in this example here, we have this function, concat, and we're passing it all of these different things over here. So maybe we have some dynamic, indicator or sentence or part of a report we have in Excel where we want it to say, the revenue from last quarter was 95,000, and we are projecting a 7.40% increase over that this quarter. And you can see that the concat function is doing exactly what you're telling it to. So if you look at this, the revenue from last quarter was, and there's no space at the end of this, so it doesn't know to put a space in between that and the 95,000. Additionally, it doesn't know this formatting. This is a currency. It just thinks that this number is 95,000, so it's just putting the 95,000 in there. But we can modify this a little bit. So let's, for example, so we can actually pass each one of these things individually, and I'll put them together. And we also know that in between this and this, we need an extra space. So we could actually just either we could modify this cell to do that, or we could put in an empty string, which is just a space encapsulated by 2 quote marks there. So if we evaluate that, we can see that there now is a space in between there. But we also wanted the $sign in there. So we could actually just add the $sign to the end of that first part. And now we have that. And, you just make adjustments. One of the trickier ones here would probably be the percentage, because you can see that the percentage in Excel is stored as not as the raw number 7.40, but that number divided by 100. So here we would have to do 100 times that, and then we would probably want to add a string that contains the percentage symbol after that, as well as maybe space to pad it. So now we have it being a 7.4%. But once again, you can just keep modifying this cat function until it displays what you need it to display, and then maybe you're doing something where you're modifying some financial document, doing a little bit of scenario planning, and you're modifying these values, and then your summary of that would change dynamically because it's built into the formula. And then here, a few other text functions where I have my name, and here I'm using the lower argument to basically give me it all lowercase. And then here I'm using uppercase argument on my whole name lowercase, and now it's giving me my whole name uppercase. And then finally, the proper function will return my name with proper capitalization at the beginning of it. So it can be very useful. You might have a list of names that you want to create corresponding emails in a different column, and you know that all the emails are going to be their first name, but all lowercase. That's how you want to sort of display it. So you just do a little bit of string manipulation there, text manipulation, and you get it. Next, we can talk about Booleans. Booleans are basically true and false, and they're essential for building some logic into how Excel can do certain things. You can get it to do certain things, display things. So true can also sometimes be a value of 1, and false can be a value of 0. But you can do things like compare two numbers with equals. That's true. Do not equals to check if a value is not equal to another one. That's also true. So 1 is not equal to. Less than, greater than, comparisons of the sort. I think you all get that. And then more interestingly, you can check for multiple conditions. So if you have two things that, if they're true, you want something to happen. Or if they're both true, you can use some AND logic. So if they're both true, the AND function will return true. If one of them is true, one of them is false, the AND function will return false. And if they're, once again, no matter which order you pass them into here, it'll return false if one of them is false. Or we'll just check if anything that is passed to it is true. So if there's one true, it's going to evaluate true, and we'll only evaluate to false if everything that's passed to it is false. And for each one of these two, you can pass multiple things. So you can check multiple things, and you can say all these things have to be true, and if they're true, then display some text, or if they are all true, then calculate something that's interesting to you or whatever. So that's how all those work. And then there's also the not function, which is going to return the opposite value of the true or false. So not true is going to be false, and not false is going to be true. And those both become very useful with this function, if and ifs. So with if, we can see this is the simplest example, but you pass it a logical test, and whether or not that test evaluates to true or false, maybe it's a comparison of numbers, it will return either a value if it's true or a value if it's false. So you might do something where you have two dates, and you can do things like compare those dates to see which one is older or newer. And if you say this second date is I guess maybe today, let's just say we want to compare today's date against some other date, and if today's date is greater than that other date, which means today is false after that other date, we want to return a sentence that that today's date is past the reference date, and if it's not, then you could get it to return false. And then here you can see that if false, which we passed to false, so it's going to be false. It's not going to return this true value because it's false, but it should return false. So, and then ifs is, oh, actually I don't even have anything there. didn't come up with an example of that, but we can look at the syntax for it, and it's again very similar, where it's going to check multiple things, and then basically the first thing that it checks that is true, it'll return a corresponding value with that. So here, the first test, I'm going to say it fails, so it shouldn't return the 0, but if it did pass, it would return 0. The second test, same thing, where it would return 1 if the second test was met. And then the third test we're going to say is true, and or it's going to evaluate to true, so it should return 2. So it's a way of checking multiple things in order, and then based on whether or not one of those conditions are met, then returning a corresponding value. And once again, these are powerful once they're built up. So you'll have comparison here. You might have like an and comparison where you're checking multiple things, and then if multiple those things are true, you're going to have it do something, or you're going to have it do something else. And get very, very long formulas for that reason. Finally, let's talk about some miscellaneous interesting ones that I think are useful. Round. Round is just useful for basically rounding numbers. Here we have, for example, in financial calculations, maybe multiplying certain things, but you're working with like dollars and cents, and there's a that gets down to the cent. So you want to find the nearest. You want to round this number here to 2 decimal places. And we do something too, like we can pass this 0, which will pass it's displaying the number, but it's rounding. You can pass it 0. Oh yeah, so you can pass it 0 here, just displaying a number of digits. That's rounding to the whole number, or maybe we want to round to the nearest thousands or tens of thousands by passing in a negative number. So that this second argument, number of digits, is kind of in reference to the decimal point, where it's positive 1, 2, or negative -1, -2, that sort of thing. But generally, you're doing 2 digits. Another interesting function is random, where it will basically just return you a number that's a random number between 0 and 1. It's just sometimes useful for generating a list of random numbers using something. So one of the things is maybe like selecting, you have a list of people who entered a raffle, right? And you want to generate a bunch of random numbers for them, and then maybe pick the one who has the highest randomly generated number to select as the winner, right? Something like that. Random array is slightly related, but more complicated in that it's going to generate multiple numbers. Here, we're having it generate 3 rows of numbers in one column between 0 and 1, and it doesn't have to be an integer, so it doesn't have to be a whole number. So here, we generate these 3 numbers. Maybe these are our 3 raffle enterers, and we assign them that random number, and we see that Jim won. His random number was highest, something like that. Or in this example here, you can start to think of what's going to happen. Here we're going to generate only 1 row of numbers, but 7 columns long, between 1 and 6, and they have to be an integer. And if we let that go, this is kind of simulating like a dice roll. Like maybe you want to kind of figure out how often it should be. If it's a fair dice, and you do a bunch of rolls. But if you want to simulate dice rolls, you can use the random array to simulate any number of dice rolls. And here we're doing a similar thing, but with a coin where there's only two outcomes, heads and a tails. So we're doing 7 flips of, heads or tails on 2 outcomes that are integers. There we go. So simple way to do kind of some random things. There are also lots of functions related to dates, which we haven't really talked about, and times. But a useful one is today, where if we just do it, it's going to return the value of today. So you might use that. You might create a form in Excel, do some things with text manipulation, maybe combining someone's name that they put in a couple of fields into another field with concatenate, and maybe at the top of the form you want to have today's dates listed. So when you print off the form, it's just going to print today's date. So you can just put the today's date function in there, so you don't have to update that Excel every time you use it. Yeah. So there's a lot we didn't talk about in Excel. There's just some brief introduction, some very common formulas. There is this formulas tab here, and you can actually see that there are these families of formulas. So we didn't talk about any in the date and time. We didn't talk about any in the financial one, where you can do, calculate net present value of certain things and give some interest rate, or what the value of accrued interest is, cumulative interest on something. You do some financial calculations. But there are lots of versions of, lots of functions within these families and different permutations on them you can work with. For example, trim. Trim is a text function that will just get rid of spaces at the beginning or end of text. Very useful. Sometimes you might have names that you brought in from somewhere, and you have some extra end spaces at the end of names, or at the beginning of mistyped the space at the beginning of the name. You can use trim to clean up all those names and just have clean text. There's also a bunch of other things we talk about maybe in the future in Excel. Excel does a lot of funky things with data types. So sometimes you can store a number as text, and it's gonna kind of treat it as text. Sometimes Excel is gonna kind of assume that it's a number in certain contexts. Sometimes it won't. That can be kind of tricky. In general, it's gonna assume that a number is a number, but you can always kind of explicitly tell it that it's a number using data types. Dates are another thing that can behave in certain weird ways. So here we have a date that just looks like a date, but here we have a number that Excel will also interpret as that same date. Or if we try to convert that date to a number, it's going to give us that number. There's a very particular reason why, but we won't get into it at the time. There's a lot of interesting tips about formatting Excel, customizing your view in Excel, printing things to make them lay out correctly, useful shortcuts, copy and paste behavior, and there's a whole other thing, lots of other things you can do with Excel to clean up data, check for duplicates, do some conditional formatting, having it autofill certain things, connecting it to a database and having it update things dynamically, doing certain types of analytical things too. And then the kind of step up from formulas too is like using macros and Visual Basic scripts to automate some things further, or handle some tasks. And then I just want to end here with another little quick Excel joke. The pessimist thinks that the glass is half empty. The optimist, the glass is half full. Excel thinks that the glass is January 2nd, because it thinks that one half is referring to January 2nd. So thank you for attending our Zoom webinar. We often offer free Zoom webinars at 3 o'clock most days of the week. If you're interested in anything you heard here, or you want to get in contact with us, feel free to reach out to Catherine at communitycpa.com. She's our marketing manager, and give us a call. It's 515-288-3188, and we're open 6 days a week from 8:30 to 5:30. So we're always here to help, and I look forward to seeing you.